This is your daily dose of all things royal.
I now recognize Mr. Curtis Shuby for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and to the members of this committee, thank you for having me here today. My name is Curtis Shuby. I am the Executive Director of Council to Modernize Governance. We are a nonprofit, and our overall mission is to reduce the power of the administrative state and ultimately return that power back to both the Congress and the people. I'm here today to talk about internet censorship and Homeland Security's involvement in it. Now, the overarching principle that I'd like this committee to keep in mind today as I speak is this: the answer to wrong speech is more speech, not less. Giving government the power to determine what is true and what is not, and the power to determine what narratives can be spoken and what cannot, and giving the power to silence the dissenting voice is opening the door to tyranny. Now, I submitted some written testimony for this committee. I'd like to just give some of the highlights. We all remember back in 2020, election and COVID-related content was routinely marked as misinformation or malinformation or disinformation on social media. Sometimes it was given that little moniker saying that this is disinformation. Sometimes it was deleted, and sometimes the person who spoke even was removed from social media. Now, in a time when 54% of Americans say at least sometimes they get their news from social media, this is a very significant development. It means that some messages are able to get to a significant portion of the American populace, and some messages are not. Now, we've come to find out that there were specific NGOs who were driving this effort. They had determined what messages constituted MDM, misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, and they would funnel that off into social media companies who would in turn delete that content. We've also come to find out that some government employees were involved in that during 2020, but as far as we can tell, leadership was not until President Biden took over. So I want to talk about CISA, which we think was one of the more abusive sub-agencies within this effort. So what CISA did, it was created in 2018. It was created to oversee the American infrastructure with regard to cybersecurity. But it took the term that was given in the statutory mandate, quote, critical infrastructure, and took that to mean cognitive infrastructure. So something that was meant for us, the US government, to oversee the tangible elements of our cybersecurity, they took that to mean it can censor American thought. Now, if CISA had begun to itself routinely identify content and report it itself, the American public would have had an outcry because we intuitively know that that would violate the First Amendment. What it did instead is it begun to fund these NGOs that had been driving this effort in the form of grants. The plan was to have the NGOs do the dirty work. The NGO would be the one to identify the content. The NGO would be the one to contact social media, and the government would have less of a hand in it. CISA spent a lot of money in this endeavor. The Center for Internet Security, for example, received $107 million in DHS grants in the last 3 years. Other parts of the Department of Homeland Security, like FEMA, were also involved in these type of efforts. And this is all by design. Again, the government knows that social media has protections under Section 230 and other legal precedents. So the government can claim, hey, we didn't remove any of this content, Facebook did it. And then Facebook in turn can say, well, we have protections under Section 230 and other versions of the law, and then there's no legal recourse for the censored party there either. And this is exactly what happened last year in Murphy v. Missouri when the Supreme Court upheld the dismissal of censored Americans' lawsuits because they supposedly did not have standing. So members, misinterpreting statutes and finding legal loopholes to avoid the protections given to all Americans under the First Amendment is abuse. Funding that effort is waste. The government knows that it should not and cannot censor the speech of American citizens. So under President Biden's leadership, it found that loophole, and this must be fixed. And unfortunately, there are some opportunities for Congress to fix this. It could pass laws that better define what the term critical infrastructure is to keep CISA under control. It can also pass laws that would prevent any government funding of an NGO or other private party who was involved in censorship efforts. And third, it can pass a law that would give citizens standing to have legal recourse when the types of activities described here and today were to occur. Thank you for having me today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Shuby. I now recognize Mr. Mike Howell for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Members of the subcommittee, Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the role of NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, in facilitating mass illegal immigration. I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Oversight Project and previously was at DHS and on Capitol Hill conducting oversight of immigration matters. The United States of America is still reeling from the worst border invasion in its history. This was an invasion that was planned, promoted, encouraged, funded, and sustained by radical elements of the previous administration. But this invasion could not have been accomplished without a colossal partnership with the NGO community. Simply put, the government just did not have the capacity to get this many people in and around the country without the support of the nonprofits. And to that end, they gave them almost $6 billion to a conglomerate of UN agencies and over 200 NGOs to do just that, according to statistics from the Center for Immigration Studies. The result was that Border Patrol became a daycare. They became Uber drivers just to shuttle illegals to the nonprofits to get them around the country. Now, the Oversight Project has led the way in exposing what I call this border industrial complex. In December of 2022, we did the first of its kind study where we tracked illegal aliens by their cell phones as they went through these nonprofits at the border. In just a 1-month period, in tracking 30,000 devices, so a very small subset of the 10 million that Biden had crossed the border, we found out that the illegals went to nearly every single congressional district in the United States. We proved that every town was indeed a border town. That work informed the House of Representatives to pass H.R. 2, which notably contained a provision defunding the entirety of these NGOs. Now, this was a landmark event. It was controversial even amongst politicians here in DC, because the dirty secret is a lot of politicians have a very cozy relationship with these organizations. In fact, one member went as far to say that that provision in H.R. 2 was unchristian. Well, that's now a common sense principle for immigration policy today, that we do not fund our own invasion. And to that end, DHS pausing all money to these organizations is simply common sense. Now, really quickly on H.R. 2, because there's been a lot of confusion on this point. Some of your colleagues last Congress over in the Senate introduced a bill to undercut H.R. 2 that would have mandated a new normal of illegal boarding crossings at over 5,000 a day. Now, I'm going to quote President Trump here from his State of the Union last week. People kept saying we needed new legislation to secure the border, but it turned out all we needed is a new president. He was right. He is right. In addition, the Oversight Project continues to lead the way in uncovering seedy behavior after behavior at NGOs. In New York, we found illegal aliens getting false residence documents. In Mexico, we found flyers at an illegal alien staging camp encouraging illegals to vote for Biden. In Arizona, we found a former Mexican consulate official at the Southside Worker Center in Tucson advising illegals how to lie to law enforcement and invade ICE. That's against the law. Additionally, we produced documentary evidence of non-citizens admitting on camera to being registered to vote in Georgia, North Carolina, Minnesota, Arizona. So where are all the government investigations? I am begging for someone to please join us. What about the DHS OIG? I see investigation after investigation into the conditions at ICE facilities. Where are the investigations of these nonprofits and the $6 billion that flowed through them? It's time that we start treating the Biden border crisis like the crime scene that it is. Now, this body funded it. I know a lot of members here want nothing to do with it, but the money came from Congress to fund the Biden border invasion. And so this body retains a responsibility and luckily the authority to figure out exactly how that money was spent and where these illegals ended up. And what NGOs, like the ones that helped facilitate the travel of Jose Ibarra, where he ended up killing Lake and Riley, what taxpayer dollars were involved in that? And one thing I want to leave you with, perhaps most importantly, is the left designed a sophisticated infrastructure to get this many people in the country. You all can do the same thing to get them out. I'm encouraging you to look at all available funding streams to help work with people outside the government to educate illegals on how to leave, to help arrange or even pay for their travel home. I call this whole concept homeward bound. People need to go home. It's time for a modernization of the immigration enforcement system writ large. This means we don't need to secure the border for just 2025, but forever. A renaissance in applying technology and scientific advancements. With that, I thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering all your questions.
I was such a fraud.